This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Shahar Azulay. Shahar, where are you coming from today, man?
I'm in Tel Aviv right now. Sunny and hot
Oh,
Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv. I'm in Miami, so I feel like we're both hot, humid, and I was there once. I was in Tel Aviv in one time. It was awesome. I want to get back so bad.
It's an amazing city. I mean, the food is great, but you shouldn't come in August. Besides that, not too other, not too much other limitations. But yeah.
Come in November. I don't remember when I was there, but it wasn't like terribly hot, so it must have been there. Anyway, I yeah, I've actually, there's a Gopher Con that happens in February every year. So my plan is to be there February 2024. So
Nice. What's the size of that? Is it like a substantial amount?
I've never been to it, but I think it's a couple hundred people. It's not terribly huge, but I like that anyway in a conference.
Yeah, it's intimate.
Yeah. All right. Give all our guests the 2 minute sort of just the 2 minutes on what you're doing today, just today. So what is Shahar doing today?
So I'm the CEO and co-founder of groundcover, which is a modern observability platform trying to reinvent what is usually known as an APM or an application performance monitoring platform where you observe your application in production. So groundcover has been up and running for the last 2 years, so that's like 110% of my time, I guess. We're 30 people, most of us are in Tel Aviv, and basically that's my last 2 years.
So this is a podcast about kind of your journey there, but I have some questions that I have to ask you right now. I feel like this is a space that is been around a while, somewhat saturated and almost owned by the cloud companies. So I'm just super curious what happened 2 years ago that made you wake up and say, I want to build a product in this space and compete against essentially giants.
Yeah, so I mean, it's super interesting because there's nothing to educate about this market, right? Developers and DevOps, they've been working with solutions like that for I don't know. Datadog and New Relic and Dynatrace have been around for like 14 years, so there's not too much to educate. So I think what kind of happened is a step function in technology, which happens from maybe longer periods of time rather than kind of reinventing a product. So we're not reinventing a product end to end of trying to claim, metrics are wrong, logs isn't for you, or something like that. We're definitely well familiar with logs, metrics, and traces, and want to get people to use them. But a few years ago, and specifically in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a major leap in the way you can actually collect observability data, and that was due to a technology called eBPF, which we can maybe dive into later. But groundcover is based on that. So basically, we just collect data very differently, and that's the reason that it allows us to, maybe claim the hard claim to fame in this very crowded market is, as you say, that it's the right time to reinvent something because otherwise it's all giants around, as you say, and the product is good. I mean, it's definitely the value is good. The value is well defined. It's just so hard to get, and there's so many problems around getting this data. So I think that with that and with our kind of knowledge in deep tech and kind of our background around that, it kind of all combined for us into a timing when we think it's right to reinvent stuff. And also, Kubernetes and microservices environments kind of blew up. People have tons of observability data, which they have nowhere to put or put somewhere and pay tons of money for. So, yeah, it kind of all combines into an era where people are trying to reinvent the way data is being stored in observability and the way data is being collected. And there's major leaps in technology there, not just in ground cover, but in database companies all around and things that can suddenly kind of, you know, solve the equation completely differently with just different tech.
My brain immediately thinks, why not just integrate eBPF data collection in existing platforms? Why build an entire platform? I would imagine you could plug in this data collection in data. I don't know enough because I use what's given to me, right? I mean, I can bring up Prometheus and Grafana and Loki and Prom Mail and all that, but like I don't know how these systems are built really underneath. So why not integration?
So in a sense, first it does make sense, right, to say just use it as another observability sensor or whatever, a way to collect the data. The reality is that this technology is super advanced and super raw. So eBPF is open source. It's not ground covers. We didn't invent it, and we totally advocate it. And for the long run, eventually, it's going to be commodity. And we believe that, as you say, people can collect data with eBPF in a more plug and play kind of manner. Right now, it's super raw. I mean, writing an eBPF sensor that is APM equivalent, that can collect data and at the level of, say, open telemetry instrumentation inside your code, that requires skill, engineering, and a lot of proprietary approach around the data you actually collect and what the user is looking for to take assumptions that will take significant lower resources than other like vanilla choices and stuff like that. So that's ground cover basically. A lot of our IP is taking eBPF as a technology and kind of implementing it into an APM sensor. So it's not there yet. And even if you look at the giants that you've mentioned, they're still far behind on actually doing that. They're going to catch up. It's just the right time for reinvention and agility in this space rather than we're not at the plug and play stage yet. We're going to get there in a few years.
Yeah, it's super. I gotta ask one more question because now my brain is spinning 1,000 miles an hour here. Like from a Kubernetes perspective, you're hooking into the operating system that's running, let's say, in a Kubernetes environment on a node. But there's so many workloads running on that node. Are you able inside your BBPF environment or code identify what workloads are running from a Kubernetes organizational standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the magic or the wow effect that we can provide because in a sense, if we had eBPF like 10 years back, then it would still be very impressive because you would probably be developing in Java, um, which makes sense. Which made sense back then. And I would then come over and say, instead of just instrumenting your code with my SDK, I can do it with eBPF. But it will be like one process on one machine, and you would go like, I mean, I can do it differently, and it's also fine. I mean, the pain isn't that great. But suddenly with Kubernetes, it's not just one machine and one process. Suddenly, all on top of that, there's like 150 different microservices running in like 15 different languages or technologies. Some of them aren't even mine. I didn't even write them. And that's where kind of the magic kicks in, since the alternative suddenly is super, super costly to kind of instrument all that. Sometimes you even can't. It's a legacy code. The guy that wrote it left the company. No one wanted to touch that, or it's a third-party component or whatever. And with eBPF, we can instrument all this at once. And to your question, yeah, we use the Kubernetes API very tightly with the data that we collect from eBPF. eBPF eventually sees a Linux machine. It sees processes and ports, and eventually kind of looks at the operating system level. And we have to take all of this Kubernetes stack and eventually project it into the data we collect. That's part of making it kind of an end-to-end Kubernetes APM. So suddenly in the UI, you see workload A talking to workload B, pod A, pod B, container A, container B, namespaces, and so on. We do that by using Kubernetes API and knowing how to basically digest it reversely into the data that we collect from the operating system. So eventually we don't present it raw because you have nothing to do with it, but present it all Kubernetes native. So you will see, the things that you're used to seeing when you're looking at Kubernetes environment.
That's amazing, dude. I've seen even New Relic back from the at least late '90s, right? With the idea, I was doing .NET back then, with the idea that they would just inject into your, I guess, into your code base or something. But for me as a developer, anytime I don't have to get involved That's a home run for me,
Magic,
right? I don't have to get involved here because you're gonna run some stuff on that machine, and like I get what I want without it affecting my life or my code base.
Yeah, so it's the same, just like on steroids, because suddenly you're an infra guy or a DevOps guy, and you're in charge of a production cluster with 150 nodes, and we can just monitor all of that for you. And behind the scenes is like a 200 developer team, and you don't have to talk to any of them.
No permission, no buy-in, no meetings.
Yeah, no sprints. 2 sprints from now, let's start integrating the SDK. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's reality, and that's why it takes so long, and that's why I think open telemetry is also being adopted so slowly. I mean, the technology is mature. It's just it's a hard journey to get all of
dude.
that instrument.
OTel has been a thorn in my. It's taken 2 years, not like 24 hours a day, okay, but 2 years to finally have what I feel is a proper integration of OTel in this teaching code base that I have. And it only happened because I was at a conference last week and I happened to sit next to the right person finally in 2 years. And I said, I can't get this to work. And in like 15 minutes, they just banged it all out. And I was it's like, who are you? I've been on Slack, I've been on Twitter, I've been like everywhere. And here you are sitting next to me. How did that happen? I think
Yeah,
it's
so
it's
that's the
complicated.
pain, I think, and I think it's gonna be clear, like I don't know, 5 years that eBPF is a very very strong sensor, and it's got to be used all across. It's not a full replacement in some cases. If you have work to instrument your code, that's great. You can be very very customized regarding what you collect, what's important to you, and so on. But in general, people don't do that, and you're losing like the 80% that you don't have the mental power or the time to do that.
So
So
here's a funny story. All right. I was working at Comcast. I don't even know how many years ago. Maybe like time's flying by so fast. Let's just say 8 years ago. Okay. Cool stuff we're doing. They had an office and they had TV monitors all over the place with the dashboards, right? So, and they would walk people through the office in the suits, right? So the suits would come and look through the office. And I'm standing and looking at one of these monitors one day, and somebody on my team or somebody comes up to me and says, "Bill, what are you doing?" And I point to the monitor and I go, "Which stat do you look at? All like which stat here is important?" And they're like, "I don't know, Bill. I never look at that." And I look at them and I go, "I don't either, but it looks pretty." And we just started laughing. And I'm just like, "Is this dashboard? Is all the CPU data networking storage that we're expelling to put this on a TV screen here just to kind of make somebody who walks in this office look like we know what we're
feels like
doing?"
we're on top of things.
Because I don't look at any of this stuff. Like I couldn't really care. I don't even know what half of it even is.
Yeah, it's not that far from general observability data, even like logs and stuff like that. It's kind of the fear of missing out more than anything else.
When I'm teaching, I tell people like you can't log as an insurance policy anymore. You have to know what you're logging and why you're logging it and signal to noise. But it's the same thing with the metrics in these dashboards, right? Because you're expelling compute power somewhere along the line.
I think that companies, like actual companies, are still so far behind of what you're actually claiming. I mean, people write log volumes that are mind blowing. That can, no way, no ever anyone is querying that in a sufficient level that justify that. And these are intelligent people, but eventually, when you build products, you run much faster than your observability stack, and you don't have time to worry about it. And you do prefer to have to kind of have an insurance policy or whatever. So when you have a downtime, you have more data that you need, but no one is to blame for, and people pay for it. And not just in kind of money, but also in slow query, dashboards that break, like poor experience in most cases, and companies live with that.
And it's mind blowing to me. Okay. We're going to get back to this. We're going to get back to this. But this is really a podcast about you. And I'd love to sort of hear your story and your journey on how you got to ground cover. So, a couple questions out of the box that I always like to ask. And I don't remember how the grade school works in Israel. So, um, what is sort of your last year of grade school like in the US? It's you're 14, well, it's usually about 14, 15, 16, 17. It's your last 4 years of school before you make a choice about university or trade. How does that work in Israel? It's the same thing as those sort of 4 years.
Uh, yeah, so Israel is a unique country in many ways, but maybe that's what makes our tech interesting also. Yeah, so we study until like 17 or 18, through high school, and then we get drafted to the army. That everyone has to get drafted to the army, and I've been through. I went through a specific route where people can.
Wait. Don't tell me yet. I'm trying to get a time frame. So what year was it when you say finished? I'm going to call it high school. Finished that high school and had to go into the draft. What year is that?
2002.
2002. Okay, so it's sort of my time frame. You're like 17, and it's good to have that just because we can understand what the tech was like for you in the early ages. So 2002. All right. Here's my first question. I want you to clear your mind, and I want you to give me the very first memory that pops in your head um, of you remembering working on a computer. That first like memory that pops. Don't think too hard. Just the first one.
It's some game at some point. I don't remember even which were the first, but I think for programming was more around high school, and before that it was just games of all sorts. And back then it wasn't that it wasn't that interesting graphically like today. But all kinds of shooter games, adventure games, mostly kind of first person games. That was mostly my thing back then.
Was this with a computer in the house or one of the gaming consoles?
No, it was in the house in most cases. I don't remember what age was that, but it was pretty early.
Are you still a gamer? Like I was, I never became a gamer, so I don't necessarily understand it. But do you still play games in your spare time?
No, I actually don't. Today, no, not anymore. I mean, for a long time, not anymore. Yeah, but it was mostly through kind of high school and the army years, but it kind of faded away. Maybe because of busy life. I don't know.
But it's not because you kind of lost interest. I mean, if you ended up having a gaming console somewhere, or maybe not, you'd have other things to do.
I don't know. It's fun, but it's kind of the one of these things that I just grew out of. But I don't know why. I mean, it was mostly silly game, not strategic games like you play for a long time. So maybe that's kind of where I lost interest. But yeah, no, not doing that today anymore, which is interesting.
So I want to talk about those high school years, that 14, 15, 16, 17, and get a general sense of kind of what were you into during those years? Were you into music, art? Like when did you discover computers around that time too? Just get a little bit of background on kind of who you were during those years.
I think I wasn't like super or specifically interested in computers back then. I was interested in school and playing soccer. Basically, that's what was mostly my interest. But I was interested in kind of mathematics, physics stuff at school that I loved back then. Computers were mostly kind of around early social networks, gaming, stuff like that, which I used quite a lot, but it wasn't anything more than that. I wasn't kind of programming for fun back then, or it kind of started when high school just began and became a bit more formal for me. So, and that's kind of where it kicked off. But I wasn't one of these, kids that grew into it like self-taught at that point.
So just regular kid playing sports outside, not thinking much about life beyond I have to go to school tomorrow kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But you had a computer in the home, but you were using it mostly for gaming and maybe homework or I mean, it's still early, right? We're talking late 90s. So Did you have dial-up at home at that point?
Yeah, so the experience wasn't as strong as today, but yeah, it was early. It was simple games, chat experiences back then, stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't something ICQ, things like that. Not something as vivid as today.
So this is actually an interesting question because if you're living in the US and you're 17 and you're about to graduate high school, you're now thinking about university, but I guess you're thinking about I have to be drafted first, right? So does the whole idea of university go away at that point?
So it's kind of where each person takes it. But if you go into the actual army, then eventually, yeah, you're drafted into one of the routes you go to, and you forget about school for like 3 years at minimum. It can be more if you're kind of becoming an officer or whatever, and you stick around for more. Or you took the route that I took, and you can go and kind of go to kind of college or university like you do in the States, at right after high school, and then get drafted after you finish. You kind of study like a normal student, and then or half normal student, and then when you finish, you're getting drafted to kind of the position that you've trained for, or the kind of the profession you've studied. So there's a lot of folks going that route, but most of the people go to general army and then go to school. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you're able to go to school first if you want. I guess at some point before you turn a certain age, you need to do those 2 years, right?
Yeah, for guys it's 3 years, but yeah.
Or 3 years. Okay, so what are you thinking then? So you realize I don't want to do my army. I don't want to satisfy my army requirement right away. You want to go to university. So what are you thinking about in terms of university and what you want to learn?
For me, it was very clear, like stupidly clear. I wanted to go to physics. I want to study physics. I don't know why. I mean, back then, I mean, I did, but looking back, I studied electrical engineering too, which was kind of the early days of computer engineering back then, or software engineering back then. So I wanted to go and do that, and other than that, I didn't know anything. So it was the major driver behind what I did, and eventually I got into a specific kind of program where physics was attached to software engineering or electrical engineering back then, kind of into a dual kind of profession or degree, and then that's what I did for like 4 years, and then got drafted.
It's interesting, physics. So some of the best software developers I've met in the last 10 years have physics degrees. In fact, some of the best software developers I've met go into university on some engineering track other than computer science for some reason. Um, and I find like there's no jobs in the discipline they go study for, and everybody ends up writing code at some point. But physics meant what? Like,
Today it's super clear. I mean, almost in every kind of similar route in the university, whether it's electrical engineering or computer science or software engineering or whatever the flavor, you're gonna write code, so it doesn't really matter. Back then, it was the early start of that, but it was segmented a bit where electrical engineering back then, at least in Israel, was much more around. Engineering from a physics perspective, or a bit more around the physics aspects of engineering in most of the stuff that I did, with computer science kind of luring in there a lot all across there for simulations or whatever. But it was much less of pure computer science, which I think it's kind of getting into now. I mean, there isn't too much difference, but I got to kind of complement that in my majors, and I did actual computer science. But it doesn't really matter once you're in the industry. It's the same. I mean, I did a lot of years back after I've been in the industry, so in a matter of sense, it just kind of feels the same.
I get this sense that you weren't thinking about career. You just wanted the academic pursuit of physics at the time, and you just happened to land now into the computer science. So that was, were you? So my wife has um, an industrial engineering degree in Columbia, And when she had to do some programming back then, she hated it. Like there was no love or affinity for it. Now she's a software developer. Like I don't know if it was a maturity thing or you just change over time. Did you have that same sort of? How did you feel when you first started seeing the idea that you can write code?
I mean, I loved it, but it was around at the beginning. It was around scientific simulation stuff like that, and then it kind of went into actual code. But I also did that in high school, like actual coding in like various languages. I kind of liked it because it was very logical. You were building stuff. It was always with a clear purpose. The deliverable was really clear, so it was fun. Actually really liked it. But then, when going into the academic kind of career path of that, I wanted to. I mean, I had an unclear passion for physics, but the fact that it combined also made sense. I mean, I liked both, but I wouldn't go back then at 17. I wouldn't go for computer science alone if I had that choice back then, just out of, I don't know, instinct, a weird instinct, but that was the data I had back then.
But as you're getting through that, how long? What is that like a 4-year degree as well, like
Yeah,
in the States?
yeah.
So at some point, you're getting these. You're getting closer and closer to graduation, and I know you got to go into the draft, but is it starting to get clear like what you want to do for work at the point that you're getting closer to graduation?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of matured through my academic years, it became more clear that theoretical physics or the things that I imagined was not the thing that I actually like, and it was more around engineering, coding back then, or the kind of aspects of that. Once our specific training gets drafted, most of the people that today it's even clearer, but back then it was also most of the people go into some kind of cybersecurity similar routes because eventually you get drafted to the three-letter agencies in Israel. So that's your service. That's what you do for your army service. You eventually go into an offensive or kind of similar cyber security years. So it's back to basics, coding, different aspects of engineering around operating systems.
Wait, so that's interesting. So let me see if I hear this right. If you take the college track first and you get one of these sort of engineering degrees, when you have to do your service, they're going to put you in an engineering role more so than a foot soldier, let's say. Um, oh, so I would think more people would want to go through that track just to have that better. Maybe that's just me. Have that better job.
It's a kind of twofold answer. One is, it's not for everyone. There's clearly criteria for that. You have to be good at high school and blah blah blah. And on the other route, I think that the actual army service in Israel it's considered very highly. And you eventually get a very significant time in your life when you meet people that's going to hang out with you for the rest of your life, close friends that have been with you for 3 years in combat service or air force or whatever you're going for. So people don't look at it as like the poor choice in many cases, and it's the first choice for many people. So it kind of depends on how you look at it. Back then, for me, it made sense. I was into that. I wanted that. I wanted to learn, but it's not clear. I mean, a lot of people postpone their academic training, and then it looks kind of odd compared to the States. You're just starting to learn it. You get drafted, you finish at 21 or 22. Then that's the age where Israelis go travel the world because you're suddenly gaining maturity and freedom back. So you have to travel for a year, right? So that's where you're going to see us popping up different locations around the world. And then you only get back to school like 24, and just then you're going to start your bachelor degree. So it's a bit different, a bit more mature, I think. Kind of people that go through this route come more mature into this position of what they want to do in life, but it's significantly later. I mean, you guys back then at that age are already like in the industry.
industry, some people are getting married. I feel like you're starting that. What we kind of start at 22, you're starting at 30, in a general
In
sense
a
now.
sense, yeah. In a sense, a lot of people do.
But it's almost, I think that could be really good for a lot of people. My mom started me in kindergarten like a year early, and I never felt, and that's because of cutoffs and stuff, right? Like she just wanted me in school, but I never felt I was as mature as everybody around me, and I think my immaturity didn't help with my education. I was really not good at. I always felt I was behind, right? My brain got better as I got older, and so now I'm thinking, man, if I had started university at 24 instead of 17, I bet you things would have been a lot different.
Yeah, it's a different mindset. I mean, you come more prepared for kind of hard work, what you want to get, rather than kind of maybe going through that period as an 18 or 17-year old. But I kind of had the opposite experience. I was an Israeli in kind of American lifestyle back then, because I was 17 in the academic world where people around me were older because that's what you do in Israel. So I kind of got to diverge from my friends. So they were in the army, I was at school, then I finished, and they were just starting to think about what to do. So it's kind of weird. It has disadvantages also to kind of diverge from the major stream in what everybody's around you doing.
But when you do your 3 years, it must feel like you're getting on the job training then too. You're getting to leverage the education you have and turning it into a job skill for a resume, right?
Yeah, so once you go into the army after the academic training, then it's like working at a very good high tech company, just with kind of the most amazing people you can think of around you. I mean, one of the things we always said it was that kind of recreating that quality group that we had in those years. I mean, it can only happen in systems like the intelligence corps in the Israeli army or whatever, where people just going from engineering universities and directly into these positions, because eventually um, you get all the quality people in one place at one time at a certain age span. Everybody's like at the prime of their life, willing to work super hard. So it's a very interesting time, very different from regular industry, but it's very educational. I mean, you learn a lot at a very short time. You get exposed to a ton of technologies and challenges, and I find myself for many years of managing engineering in different roles, trying to recreate these groups. And I think we got closer in groundcover with a group that is kind of that quality, and a lot of them came from similar backgrounds.
It must be hard when you're working on, just say what you're working on there in the army, to leave at that point, because it's got to be cool stuff. Like, was it a struggle for you to say, I did my 3 years, but you know what? This is so cool. I want to stay. Or was it like, no, I'm out. I want to get into industry?
It wasn't hard at the end because I did much more than 3 years. I was there for I think about 8 years.
So you did your three and you stayed for another five then.
Yeah, so it kind of accumulated to about 8 years. So I've moved through various positions, and I've managed teams there also. So it kind of got into a point where I kind of felt I saw enough, and I want to actually see real industry, kind of non-governmental part of the industry. But it was an amazing experience.
But I can imagine that. Like your 3 years are up and you're like, I'm not done here yet. Like I want to keep
Yeah,
working on. Yeah, I can imagine that happening.
I mean, you're also super super psyched about everything you're doing, especially at the beginning, because it's all for kind of national security purposes. It's all for a higher purpose. So, in a sense, you're kind of taking your talent and trying to implementing on stuff which aren't, just your local neighborhood startup, but something a bit bigger than that, with more people for a bigger cause. So it's very powerful, specifically when you're like 22. I mean, it does have a lot of impact on you.
But I'm guessing now it's about 2014 ish. and you decide that, do you decide that you burned out? Do you decide that you've done everything that you can do here? Or do you decide that I want to start making some money? Or maybe something else?
It wasn't about money back then. It was kind of about exploring, seeing other stuff, um, kind of going into a few different routes.
Were you at that point talking to people? Did you have something lined up? Or do you decide I'm gonna leave here and then how does that work? Like what's the next thing you do when you leave the room?
So generally, if you're a sane person and not me, it's very it's very straightforward because eventually, the network effect of being in these close communities around people that do these similar paths like you through the intelligence corps. It's a very tight network, so you know a lot of people in the industry that are already in very powerful positions, or in corporates or founders or whatever. So it's easier to find where to go next, just from a networking perspective of kind of A players all around that you know from before. Um, I wasn't kind of ready for that after so many years, so I decided to do something different back then. But in a sense, it's a natural continuum of you finish that, and now you just go do similar things in the industry. Most people go into cybersecurity in big or small companies. Tel Aviv is kind of full of cybersecurity companies, which we're specifically good at because of that. So that's the natural route. You don't have to do much to get great positions there.
But what did you do? Because you said you didn't take the natural route.
Um, I wanted kind of a break, so I mean, I was actually during my academic life in like 19 or something. I went to culinary school, and I've also worked at that for over weekends. I can't even remember why it made sense and why I had time for that. But when I kind of finished my army session, I just kind of left for almost 18 months and worked as a cook, basically in restaurants and different. Most of
Wow.
them kind of in more rural areas of Israel, so kind of to have the nature adventure as well. But yeah.
Okay, two things there. One, I think that's awesome, right? Like I'll daydream sometimes, like just I want to get out of tech and just have a job outside or do something completely sort of different that just so you just did that. You're like, I want to, but did you know at the time it was just a pit stop or you thought I'm going to try to make a career out of being a chef?
I mean, I wanted to tell myself back then that it wasn't just a pit stop; it was a real experiment. Because eventually, I think the hardest part is kind of letting go of one safety. So I did let go completely. I mean, eventually the thing that you feel as someone who's been doing the same thing for so many years, and I think you can relate as a technology person, is eventually when you transition into a different group, like a bunch of cooks in a restaurant, they don't see you like that anymore. It doesn't matter. So kind of giving up that identity is the hardest part. I mean, that was kind of my quality mark, right? That's what I've been doing for years. That's what kind of differentiated me. So it was a true experience, but eventually, it's super hard, even from a financial kind of trade-off, to go that route after you've done all that, and after you know what it is to work in tech. And it's a very different it's a very different type of challenge. But it's a kind of a period of life which I'm really proud of. I mean, I'm proud of that I did it, but eventually it made sense to go back to normal life in a sense back then, but it took a while.
I mean, you're starting over, right? You're the low person in the kitchen. You're starting. You went from being somebody that everybody's depending on from this, right, to now like go peel the potatoes, Shahar, because like that, and that had to be hard because so I'm kind of curious. After 18 months, did you just say like what did you say to yourself after 18 months? I don't want this, or I just I'm just curious. What was the final?
Um, it was kind of more graduate than that. I think closer to the end of these 18 months, I kind of there was an opportunity. A group of very good friends that I knew from before that was working on a project. It was the golden era of automotive cybersecurity back then, like companies doing automotive cybersecurity popping up in Israel, and it was a very interesting challenge. So I started doing that for like a couple of days a week, and it kind of lasted for about 2 months of transition, and it just sucked me in. Eventually, once you once you open a window, it's really hard to. I remember I would come with a laptop. I just gonna throw the MacBook under one of the workstations in the restaurant, and just put on the uniform and go back to work. But eventually, you feel like you're living in a kind of a dual reality, so you have to choose at some point.
All right, two things. One, did any of the other people working in the kitchen see you with the laptop and like must have been asking what you were doing?
I mean, there was kind of rumors about that, or before it was like the tech dude that gone wild and kind of lost it. There was kind of these kind of talks, regardless, because eventually you talk to people and they don't get why you do that. But yeah, I mean, later on when it kind of became more a graduate transition, then it was for some of them it was clear, perhaps earlier than me, that it started to end, kind of that this period started to end. But yeah,
But were you nervous that maybe you forgot everything after 18 months? A lot can go by after 18 months. You must have been getting nervous.
yeah, you totally think that. It's not like you're forgetting it, but you're like, I mean, can I do it again at like these, at these velocities, and with the kind of the energy I had before or whatever. Yeah,
Eventually you transitioned back. So this has to be 2016-ish, I would imagine around. We have
yeah,
to be
stuff like that.
yeah. You go back and you start working now on this team. Was this more this I guess this is like a startup in a sense?
Yeah, it was. I mean, back then it was a startup, which eventually became a very big company working with kind of the big automotive concerns in Europe. But back then it was a 5, 6 people startup,
How long were you at this place?
a year and a half, something like
A
that.
year and a half.
Yeah,
And I imagine within 6 weeks, you felt like you were right back where you'd started. Like, no worries. This is all
two
good.
days, I would say. Yeah.
2 days.
Eventually it's in there somewhere. Just have to dig it up. But yeah, it's very fast, and it was also a very interesting challenge. And suddenly, you're flying to companies like Volkswagen and Lufthansa and all these big companies where they want to talk about cybersecurity and whatever. I mean, this transition suddenly happens like in a second.
Is the tech stack here like all C programming on this specialized hardware that runs in the cars?
So back then it started, I think, that was kind of the perception back there. It first started by proving there's a problem. I mean, very different than what we're doing today in groundcover. It was like a lot of errors in cybersecurity. It was kind of an educational move of, cars can be hacked, right? So what we did back then was a lot of proving that. It was super cool. But
So what, you bought a car, you bought a Volkswagen and you brought it
we
to the
actually didn't
office?
buy a Volkswagen, but we worked with these companies, and they let us have cars to try out. But yeah, eventually we did a lot of testing on automotive cars in production or in testing or whatever, to
Whoa,
prove that
dude.
there's a problem. It wasn't just
Dude, no,
the
you're
company that I
scary.
worked
So wait a second here. So they give you a car and they say, do what you can to it, right? Like just hack this and find out what's going on.
Yeah, the problem wasn't well defined. It was just the beginning of what was then considered a connected car, where you can you have an app, you can open the doors of your car or see the I don't know the gas meter from remotely or whatever. So it was super interesting kind of use case back then compared to what we had before. And then, clearly it made the attack surface super easy for people to start engaging connected cars. So yeah, we proved a lot of interesting stuff back then. That the early technologies that automotive companies put out. I mean, it's completely different today, but the early technologies that they put out wasn't secure enough to stop someone from doing all sorts of crazy stuff to your car.
This is what I'm imagining. You're in the office and you have one of these oh my god moments. We just hacked this. And now like that day you're walking down the street and you see the same car and your brain goes, yeah, I can hack that. Like you have to almost your whole brain must have been consumed, right?
it it was never that simple. It was like back then, me managing a team of 4 or 5 people doing that, and it was significant effort. I mean, it wasn't like a fun repeat and replay, attack that we found, but eventually it was just to prove that there's kind of point to concern for these big companies, and then the transition from there was in all the companies doing it at the same time. There was like 3 or 4 was building a product through that. I think that's part of the reason that I left is that the product wasn't clear enough. I think we were more focused on proving the problem, and it wasn't really a clear requirement. And it happens a lot of security about what's the actual product. I mean, okay, got it. You can attack us now. What do we actually need? Is it a another computer system sitting in my kind of automotive CAN bus? What is it? I mean, is it like a SaaS software? I don't know, proxying stuff and validating entries to the car. No one really knew back then, so it was a bit too early for this market. But
I would think the product is fixing the holes that you found in one form or another, whether that meant re-architecting or just fixing.
yeah, but that's not a product, and that's kind of it takes the edge off of building something. It becomes more of a professional service, of kind of doing basically attack surface testing, whatever you call it, to make sure that things are tight. Right? It's not enough. You can do it with a bug bounty, right? You don't need us.
So you're there for like 18 months, which puts us in around 2018. And what do you do? So you're thinking, I don't want to work on this anymore. So does something just pop up on your radar or you start looking?
So it was back then. It was I think 2017. It was back then where I wanted to go from cyber into something else. I was kind of tired of cyber. I think that specifically kind of stuck on with me. I mean, I really appreciate cybersecurity and the beauty of the technology there. It kind of requires people to go into the craziest software engineering capabilities you need to get stuff done. But I was kind of worn out from these scare tactics of building a product around what you fear uh, of something that can happen rather than value or whatever, like simple value. So I was looking at other stuff, and I was looking mostly at machine learning and kind of algorithms back then. It was quite early, not compared to now, at least compared to now. So I moved to a very early stage startup. I was one of the first developers back then, kind of going back to basics, but going back to being an individual contributor in what was machine learning for health startup back then called DayTwo. So that was kind of my decision back then, not go to cyber or go to something that was for, I don't know, the greater good, health, uh, go to a completely different profession like ML. So that's what I did.
But now you're changing your stack, right? I'm imagining you were doing that in Python.
Yeah. But I mean, I kind of found myself doing that a lot in the career, kind of shifting, trying to go back to basics all the time and prove to myself that, I can still do that. I can still pull it off. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my nature. But yeah, it was a completely different stack, a completely different mindset, completely different startup. Also, it wasn't cyber. It wasn't the same people. It wasn't. It was B2C. So we were selling to individuals at the beginning. It was kind of an app. Very different vibe. Um,
It had to be less stressful for you too, right? It wasn't as serious? I would almost imagine, or did you still feel a sense of
It's kind of the same because if you're someone that wants to build quality stuff, then you're always stressed about whatever you're putting out. It was eventually a real time product serving real people. You're worried about whether it would work right in production or whatever. The same kind of worries. It doesn't really matter. It was just different.
what was the product trying to do with AI? It was trying to diagnose somebody healthcare wise, or
It was trying to help people control diabetes back then. So we would kind of get personal information about you. There was a big trained model on a lot of personal information from a cohort of a kind of thousands of people, and we would recommend specific food or kind of dietary compatibility to you personally based on you trying to control your sugar, basically.
interesting. But it doesn't sound like you were there very long.
I was there for a while, actually. I was there for over 3 years. I eventually I managed the research group back then when the startup kind of grew.
That's like your MO, man. You go in as an IC and you very quickly start managing people.
Yeah.
Do you ever want to say no when they offer you that, or you enjoy managing?
I really enjoy managing. Yeah. I mean, I love working with people. I find it very fulfilling to kind of create an environment where um, the team has the culture to kind of operate at high performance. I really like that. Yeah.
But as you, in every one of these situations, as you transition into managing, are you doing less development, or you get to continue to keep your hands busy?
Um, so back then it was kind of a team of eight at the peak. So I was able to keep on a lot of hands on. But yeah, I mean, at least in the army part of my life, it was. I mean, the manager position was kind of wearing out my hands-on skill back then. It was a bigger group of about 15 or 20 back then, but it was enough to get too far away from the actual code.
I imagine that within how quickly does this happen to you when you start a job? Like within like 6 months or a year, they finally just say, "We want you to manage this team."
You're kind of letting all my secrets fly out. Yeah, it's usually kind of under a year. That's from from
But
what
okay,
happened.
here's a question, which is actually because I imagine when you transition that quickly into a management, your peers, you now have to manage people that were your peers. That can be really, really hard because people feel like you passed them up for something that they wanted. So, how do you deal in these situations where suddenly you're an IC and now you're managing everyone, right? And overnight, somebody has to listen to you. Have you ever had somebody that was just like, I'm not going to, I, I don't care who you are. I'm not listening to you.
No, not that. But as a very young manager, I mean, I was kind of managing my first team. I don't know. I think at 23 or something like that. So it was managing people older than you or significantly older than you. And it's interesting challenge back then. I mean, kind of you feeling as a. I mean, today it's different, and you feel like you have a lot of experience at least to back up what you do. But back then it was managing someone, I don't know, 5 or 10 years older than you in the industry. It was more of a personal challenge, kind of to mitigate that. But I think it's kind of the style of management that kind of let that go by pretty easily because I mean, I don't think in many cases people felt like it was weird or I was kind of pushing them in a wrong direction because I was bypassing them in some sort or another. But yeah, it's a challenge.
I would love to just be a fly on the wall if you ever started another. I mean, you have your own business now, but just to see that transition from individual contributor to like, you must have been the person in the during the meetings that just maybe spoke up, had those ideas, had some like, what do you think it is about you or the way you interact on a team that gets you there so quickly? I've met other people like you. I find it sort of fascinating.
Um, I don't really know, but I think I think in most cases, from what I've seen, in the opposite direction about people that kind of struck me in that position, where you see someone and say, okay, it's clear where it's going to go. It was usually around passion, and, seeing people that are really driven by passion around what they do, and you get a sense of that they're going to work super hard to get it. So no matter what I do, or what I say, or how I guide them, eventually they're going to be much more into that than perhaps other people are normally. So I think, at least in my very early years, that was kind of something I was very clear about. Working hard, trying to be very initiative, learning really fast. I mean, that's these kind of things. But I have no idea.
I'm curious if in any of these roles, I mean, you left this place in 3 years. Um, did you ever aspire to be the VP of engineering or the CTO in any of these places?
So it's kind of an interesting thing, because I think up until kind of ground cover, I was always not like 100%. I mean, my wife used to say that I'm not kind of 100% happy with whatever I am. It was always, the culture wasn't enough, or the quality wasn't enough, or kind of the organization wasn't producing what I wanted enough. So I think kind of building it on your own, or kind of taking and not everything is perfect, clearly, but at least taking full ownership on that, um, kind of made me at peace with that, which is interesting. But it always made me kind of want to not necessarily take this role, but it was kind of always happening. I wasn't aiming to, take the research team, or later on take other positions, but it just kind of happened. So for similar reasons, I guess I left. Eventually, kind of figuring out.
Yeah, but if you get high enough in an organization, then you can make that change that you want. But you
True.
maybe you just felt like you couldn't. Yeah. So then, what happens after 3 years? You're working on ML, AI, healthcare. You're building another product. Do you get bored again? Do you just you want to do something else again?
I mean, I feel like back then, I feel like that's cool. I've been doing that for like 3 years. I'm good at that, but I want to get smarter at that. Kind of know the theory behind ML really deeply. I want to do a majors of that. Kind of do a thesis on theoretical ML. That's what I wanted back then. So that's what I do. So
You go back to
I kind of,
school.
yeah. So I go back to school, and
You
at
go back to
first,
school full time.
so in the beginning, it was like, I don't remember exactly, but maybe 6 months full time, and then I get kind of pulled into Apple by someone who knows me. So it was like half time at Apple back then, and half time working for a while. But
I'm guessing you said you had a wife that she's working because you just walked away from a paycheck at your age.
yeah, she was
Not
working.
only did you walk away from a paycheck, you're now spending money to go back to university.
True,
I mean,
but it's
that's
not
a
the
big.
same amount. It's not the same crazy amounts as you guys have in the States,
I
which is
know, but still, dude, you're making like a salary, and then the next day you're like not making a salary. I'm going back to school. Your wife must have been like, no problem, but she had to be working, right?
yeah, she was working. But again, after a few months, I kind of started half time at Apple, so it kind of even stuff out. What I wasn't worried about. You
Did you
know,
finish that degree?
I did. Yeah,
Okay, so you got this. Is it like a master's degree in
yeah, in computer science.
ML in computer science with a focus on artificial AI and ML and all that?
Yeah, maybe it's like the same thread of theoretical physics back then. It was kind of going deep into theoretical ML. Kind of looking back, it was interesting. Thesis full of equations, stuff like that. But yeah, that was.
Was that a 2 year program? So now that puts you to like
It
20,
took a bit over 3 years with the thesis.
3 years, and you were working at that time. You were working at Apple. part time.
Yeah,
Did you have to
for
move to
for a short time
California at that point? Does Apple have an office in Tel Aviv?
in Herzliya, which is like 15 minutes from Tel Aviv.
Oh, okay. So no big deal. So the commute wasn't okay. I know not to ask you what you were doing at Apple, so I'm not even gonna go down that path. Um,
I'm not sure
so
why.
because everybody that I know that worked, like anybody that I know that worked at Google or Apple, if I ask them what they're doing, like at Google, sometimes they can tell me a little bit. I've never met one person at Apple that could really tell me what they're doing. Can you tell me what you were doing at Apple? Because that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I was doing a practical ML around algorithms, mostly in the watch, in the Apple Watch, kind of decision making around when to display something, when to light up the watch, when to, I don't know, identify specific sport activity, all kind of practical ML algorithms. It was a cool time.
That it this those okay. Now I got to ask you this question. If you can't answer it, it's okay. Do those algorithms run inside the watch, or they run outside the watch and like through API calls?
So it's both. There's like specific parts of the algorithm that make kind of make the first fork, uh, leaving a significant amount of the data out, and eventually making that inside the actual hardware, and then you rely on kind of SaaS based models. But I'm sure it's changed back since then, since it's been a few years.
I'm starting to get a sense of this is where your ideas of data collection and telemetry start because
It's actually a nice analogy.
because there's a lot to that data collection that you need in order to do that work that you're
Sure,
doing.
sure.
Yeah. So the whole time then those 3 years you're working at Apple while you finish your degree, or at some point you leave Apple and
No,
finish
I
your
was
degree?
working part time for a short part of that, and then life pulls me into a full time as I do as I kind of finish the masters, and the next managerial position as I as you gotta get the story. But yeah, I mean it was mostly at Apple back then for about 3 years.
Oh wow. So now what happens? You get your master's degree, which is amazing. You have this education. You're really locked in now to this new world that is all around us. Um, how do you get to ground cover? Because now we're talking, what is it now? 2018, 19,
It was already kind of early 21.
21. And we're in the middle of COVID for all of this craziness too.
Um, I think it kind of started before, in a sense of I never really saw myself working in corporates, but it was a good time during the degree, and I wanted to work with around very kind of academic oriented uh, personas back then. I think it's very different than what I did before in cyber, in different kind of orientations. I got to see a completely different world. If before people were more like self-taught, much more skilled around deduction, kind of working by them, learning by themselves. Suddenly, you get to work with people that doing PhDs and stuff like that. Very different than what I did before. So Apple was a great fit for that. I mean, the quality of people there was amazing, and working there was amazing. But I didn't really see myself doing that. I mean, most of my previous experience would been around very early stage startups, so I kind of liked the build stage. And I kind of felt ready in a sense of, you know, doing enough or seeing enough in the industry to, or at least seeing enough teams and enough cultures and enough types of environments to try and build a company. And that's what I felt.
Let me ask you a question. Looking back on it now, are you happy that you spent the 3 years getting this degree? I'd love to have a degree, but I'm at a point where I'm not putting. I don't want to put in that work. That is a lot of work, man.
Yeah, so I think kind of the thesis was super hard. I mean, it's like a never ending, you know, conscience flowing around you that makes you work super hard on on weekends and nights or whatever, because it's a never ending task. But the actual courses and maybe the kind of more formal part of the masters was actually really interesting, because I came into that later in my career, right after doing that for a while, and suddenly you take a advanced course in, I don't know, data structures or whatever, and suddenly your brain kind of resets on, you've seen examples in real life, and then you go back to theory, and it was really really interesting, a really interesting experience. I kind of like that, but writing papers and stuff like that was really hard.
See, I guess I'm asking you that if you can go back in time right now and tell yourself about that time you're about to spend, would you tell yourself to still finish the degree, or don't do this, man? We got a better idea for that time.
So I think I would do that, but just because my mindset back then was, I'm gonna do the ML thing, right? That's the new route I'm gonna do. So I've been doing it for a while, at DayTwo and then at Apple. So
Why did you think in this one particular situation you needed schooling to effectively do MLAI? Because that's what I'm hearing.
yeah, because I think back then my feeling was it was a bit earlier than today, when the empirical model world is kind of going nuts, and everybody's just taking models off the shelf and building a few API calls, and suddenly they're experts in natural language processing. But back then, most of the people around me at Apple, at least, and also my original kind of head of research that I worked in at DayTwo was PhDs all around me. So I kind of felt, okay, so suddenly, after so many years in cyber, I'm suddenly undereducated. They know so much about probability and sampling theories and basic ML theory that I know nothing about, and it makes no sense to not do it like properly. That's what I felt back then. But I think things are a bit different right now, especially when you kind of merge coding and ML. It's a bit different. There's theoretical ML, which doesn't catch up at all with empirical ML, and empirical ML is all about coding and performance training and stuff like that. You're more of the efforts go to that, to collecting data, sifting through it, training models at high scale through it. So it's kind of a different type of engineering, but you don't have to know, the bits and bytes of a specific theoretical model, which I
I think that's fair. I could picture myself in the same situation, being around all of these PhDs and highly educated degree level people and thinking, oh my God, I need to be there. I'm not their peer. I want to be their peer. And I feel like I couldn't do the work they're doing sort of without it. I think if you look back on it now, you'd probably be like, well, maybe that
yeah,
was just my brain
it
just not
was it
being
was a
trained.
lot of my brain back then, yeah, saying you should do that.
I don't want to, I'm not here discounting any sort of degree. You have the degree, you earned it. Like, it's beautiful. I know myself. I get anxious just thinking about I'm going to go back and get a degree in anything.
Yeah, and a lot of it isn't as educating as just learning by yourself or whatever, focusing on things you like. Some of it is, it's kind of a mix, but yeah.
All right. So you get your degree, you've been doing this stuff, you decide I don't I just got a degree in MLAI and I'm not necessarily wanting to do this at least anymore at Apple. Um uh you decide that I think it's time to start my own company. I love startups, but I don't see where observability comes into play here. So you can explain to me how this idea for a product shows up. And do you start this in what, the end of, like, in 21, or you start this in 22?
I started in 21, and we actually kind of incorporated the company at August
Okay,
21, something
you
like that.
used you used we. So who is we?
Yeah, so yeah, Yechezkel is my co-founder and CTO. We both, I mean, I'm a few years older than him, but we did like similar. Um, we took a similar path in life of the same academic training like I did, so I kind of know him from there. And eventually, it was this kind of partnership was very clear. I mean, that this is the person I want to do this with, and so on. And then we started kind of brainstorming around ideas, and I have to admit there were a lot of different kind of types of ideas back then, but it was
Wait, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you because this person just enters the story now. So can you give me like a couple of minutes on who this person is that you're now sitting down at a table and you're both going, let's have a startup and let's figure out what product we want to build because we know we want to start up. We just don't know what we want to build, but which is absolutely awesome. But tell me a little bit about this person. Or like, how long do you know them? When did they enter into your life? Yada yada.
so. I've known him for I think about I don't know 8 years back then or something like that, almost a decade. We known each other from kind of the same academic training or the same route in the army that we both took. So I was just a few years ahead of him, a few years older. So I was kind of at some point I was kind of running a course where he was attending or something like that. So we kind of met there, and it kind of turned into a friendship. And we always touched the different milestones. Kind of he followed what I did a few years behind every time because we took a similar path. So um, I think I felt ready back then, and he also started kind of feeling that it's time, but it was a bit more complex for him because it was closer to his discharge from the army. So for me, it was a bit more years in the industry. But we kind of started to talk about it back then of the idea of forming a company and so on. It wasn't about a specific notion of what exactly are we going to do back then, but it formed pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean that was the beginning, kind of figuring out that we want to go through this together.
Finding a business partner is essentially a marriage.
Yeah.
It's a marriage, and in that you both have to have some common ground, but you also have to complement each other. So tell me how you complement each other um, to be the best business partners that you can be.
So I think Yechezkel is much more technical than I am. He has a lot more experience in like low level development and backend, and much more things that my later part of the career was focused a bit more around algorithms and statistics and stuff like that. And he always took a much more kind of a deep tech kind of route. So he had experience in Linux development and a lot of stuff that are relevant to what we do today. So I think in that sense, he has the passion for that, kind of building the best tech, building the best people working on that tech, building a very high velocity R&D team, a lot of experience in that. I was very passionate back then about kind of building a company. I wanted to build, a company with a culture I believe in, with an idea I believe in, with a product I believe in. So I didn't have a business experience, right? I came from a technical background just like him, but we kind of felt that it was that this segmentation between us made sense. It was much more drawn to the tech. I was more drawn into kind of creating the business, even though I didn't know anything about it. So, you know, that's where it led us.
So you're sitting around a table, you decide that you want to start a product company. I don't see, so I've tried to build product before and I've never been 100% successful overall, but when it's product that I don't necessarily need or I can't dog food, I have completely failed. There are people that can do that. Don't get me, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying Bill Kennedy can't do that. And I feel like ground cover is a product that I don't see you having a personal need for. So tell me how you arrived to ground cover as a product and like where does that Where does the problem space come from for you?
So it actually came from real life. I mean, we both have been managing R&D teams in like different aspect, different times. Yechezkel was chief architect at a cyber company before groundcover, and we've been dealing with monitoring production, choosing monitoring technologies, kind of building an ecosystem inside our R&D teams to implement observability, measure stuff that we should track, and we use Datadog, we use Grafana Prometheus, we use the ELK, whatever. We use all these stacks. So it kind of combined into a few major pain points that we felt that are kind of weird in the market. We weren't as coherent on that as now, but these actual same points remain as the pain points that groundcover is trying to solve even 2 years later. So I think that's interesting. And one of them is that we felt that there was a very weird trade-off between kind of budget or data volume and the actual observability you're trying to get. So we've been, and I've seen it firsthand multiple times. You create all these metrics and you add log lines or you instrument code, and then you find that you have a cardinality issue or you have a log stream that is going wilder than you expected, and then you go back to the team and tell him, you just put all this hard work in the trash, and we can't support this data volume because the budget is too high, or I'm pushing much more volume than I expected. So that was weird. And the other thing is that it was really hard to get deep uniform observability because we were reliant a lot on logs and metrics, and traces was super scarce and hard to get. Instrumenting these SDKs didn't really work. I've worked at companies where the data science team would write in Python. There was something in Scala. There was I don't know, .NET, all across the same organization, and not a huge R&D team. And you have to make sure everybody's aligned to get uniform observability. So time to value was really hard. I mean, we didn't even get full coverage all the time. You felt like you were always kind of chasing your own tail. So these were two problems that we felt, but I think that we wouldn't have gone through building ground cover if it hadn't been to kind of running into eBPF. Because in a sense, when we saw this technology and we kind of understood the power behind it, we understood how it can help us solve these problems. We also understood that there's the questions of like, why now, why you, right? So it kind of combined very nicely with, we know why we can do it. We know why, years in cybersecurity and years in low-level development and years in this kind of mindset of, looking at a system from the outside, like you do in cybersecurity, why it can work out for us, why we can take such a raw technology like eBPF and make it something usable. So it was kind of also the desire for deep tech, for a really hard problem to solve that had a practical implementation and a practical pain point. That's what we kind of liked back then. You're on mute. So sorry. Bill, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. So I have no doubt you can build it, but you don't need the system for yourself right now. So how do you find somebody that's going to dog food this?
So actually, I think that we're both very clear at this stage, at least kind of later on the thinking process, that if we had ground cover back then, we would definitely use it. But it was more around kind of the later understanding of, can we pull it off, that we understand that it can solve part of the pain points that we felt as users, of Datadog or other open source stacks. But it took a bit of convincing for ourselves that we can actually take a technology we understand, pull it off, and then kind of imagine how it would look. It took a few weeks to kind of imagine and try it out, but we would use ground cover if we had it back then.
But I'm saying, like, today, are you using ground cover to monitor the ground cover
Yeah.
services?
Yeah.
Like, how else can you dog food it other than to monitor yourself?
Yeah. We use ground cover to monitor our production. You won't see a Datadog bill here. Yeah. That's not going to happen.
Now, from a business perspective, I've always felt like I'm at a point in my life where I don't want to build something unless I have some loose, but some commitment from somebody who's willing to at least try it. Loose commitment, right? Because if I can't put this somewhere fairly early on, then again, I feel like, why am I building this? There's no revenue model, there's no stream, there's nobody who wants it. I kind of want to have a handful of people already that agree. They could back out, but to agree to use it. Did you do any of that sort of work before you started building it? Did you get any sort of, oh yeah, if you had that, I'd be willing?
So we kind of, I think, did something a bit softer than that. We had a group of about 10 20 people that we really trusted, that come from kind of the buyer perspective of solutions like that, and also the user perspective. And we pitched a product which was, I don't remember what we pitched, but it was some very sketchy version of our thoughts back then. So we kind of pitched the product to them and kind of heard the feedback. That was kind of the best version of trying to get us closer to that as possible. But other than that, it was just go raise money and take a leap of faith on that. So it happened pretty quickly. From that to kind of the first POC of groundcover on the ground, it took like 3 months. It was super fast. But before that, I mean, it was just experiments, testing it ourselves, showing it to people we trust. It wasn't like a line of 8 design partners waiting to take it on. It was maybe a riskier leap than what people do right now, but a couple of years back, it made sense in the market.
So here's another challenge that feel like companies face, especially products like ground cover. If you're not in the conversation, you're not even a choice when it comes to picking a tech. And I feel like there's so many people in the cloud today that if you're not on a drop down list, like I work with Matt Holt with Caddy, and I've always said to Matt, Caddy's an ingress, written in Go, ingress, right? But I'm like, Matt, if you're not a choice in some cloud provider where somebody can choose to use Caddy, nobody's going to use it because the majority of people are there and they don't even know you exist. So, like, Datadog's done an amazing job to know that they exist, and and that's an option that you can use. Um, how do you become an option in a cloud environment?
So first, I agree with you. I mean, integration with cloud providers is something that is very powerful, specifically because most of our customers use managed Kubernetes in some cloud provider. It's not like 90% of them are running bare metal in some warehouse. So for right now, we have a strong correlation with what we do in AWS. So we're available on the AWS market, and we're also about to release in a few months our add-on to EKS. So it's going to be, as you say, just a drop-down list of clicking and ground cover is covering your cluster. I think it's super important, like you say, because many people just want it to work. So even though our installation is like literally a minute, and you just throw on a command line into your kubectl context or whatever, still seeing that in the kind of EKS dashboard and just clicking something and getting it installed on multiple clusters at once, we aim to get there, at least for AWS in the foreseeable future. But yeah, I think it's important. But rather than that, I think that what everything we're trying to create around ground cover is a very frictionless onboarding, regardless of this integration with the cloud provider. Because what you're describing about those kind of drop down lists and 2 clicks is that people don't want to work too hard on making a decision about a product or experiencing the product, and that drop down list just guarantees that it's going to be easy. So everything that we do around the product is trying to get it installed on huge clusters in like 90 seconds and trying to provide value in 90 seconds. And we have 0 configurations in the first onboarding. So we kind of try to create a very clear approach around the way you onboard into ground cover, whether it's through the cloud provider or whether it's through our CLI. It doesn't really matter. It will be very easy, very clean, very fast. And that's kind of a bet we took 2 years ago, and we paid a lot in R&D to get there, to kind of build this experience. But I think today people are kind of drawn into simpler experiences, even around infrastructure, even around stuff that you install on your cloud infrastructure. You still want it to be easily deployed, easily removed.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's huge because at least now I have an opportunity to try it and compare it with everything else that's there, right? So let's run this for a couple of days and see. And then that
Exactly. That's what
UI
you thought. So,
experience is
you
everything.
can delay that thought.
Yeah, I can look at it. And how intuitive is the UI, right? That's where you're going to burn your territory in terms of people. How quickly does UI come up? How intuitive is? I don't find Prometheus intuitive at all. I like rip my hair apart sometimes trying to figure out what to do in there.
Yeah, I think that surprisingly, a lot of these solutions aren't that intuitive. I mean, even Grafana. I mean, that's kind of the most common solution in IT.
That's
But
what I meant. I meant
how many
Grafana, the
people can write
Grafana
a prompt
UI.
QL query, right? I mean, how many people can edit a panel? I don't know. Maybe 0.5% of an R&D knows how to do that. So we're trying to build kind of something that has a lot of emphasis around that, and also trying to provide a really a coherent product for people who use Kubernetes but aren't experts in Kubernetes. I mean, most of the world is transitioning to Kubernetes just because someone else said it's the prime technology to use, right? It's not like you're an expert in Kubernetes, and you shouldn't be. So the same approach to deploying an APM. I don't know all the bits and bytes. So if I'm deploying an Istio service mesh or whatever, perhaps I don't know how to configure that well. And we want groundcover to have an experience of a simple installations, because perhaps you're not a Kubernetes expert. Maybe you don't even know how to configure everything that we provide, but the out of the box experience could be super easy, so you can get the value that you need and get like full stack observability really quickly.
Yeah, enough, and then I can tweak it. All right, we're almost out of time, but now I have to ask you cost. So competitively, I don't even know how these things are priced, to be honest with you. I don't know what running something. I have no idea how this stuff is priced. To me, I have no clue. So what does it cost me to use ground cover as opposed to other products?
So we have a very interesting take on that. We're kind of trying to reinvent the entire stack. So we're collecting data differently with eBPF. We store it differently in your cloud environment and not in our SaaS side, like the analogy you thought of from Apple. And we price it differently. We don't price by volume, basically. So we don't price by log volume, metric cardinality, or trace volume, which is surprising for an observability solution. We're kind of trying to make you stop worrying about how much data you collect, and make you focus on the impacts of collecting data. If you're concerned about data retention, it will eventually translate into disk or S3, and you can make a reasonable decision. It doesn't have to be broken down to a million KPIs of this much cents for gigabyte per hour per host. It will be something much more easier for you to figure out and make a decision on. And then we can just price it by the number of Kubernetes nodes you have on average in your cluster. And this is like the basic pricing for infrastructure monitoring, or like the simple stuff you're used to paying for, right? For like, kind of node explorer metrics or stuff like that. You're used to paying for the volume or size of the environment you have. So it's kind of something that is more natural, more predictable. You know how much nodes you have. If I ask you now how much node you have in your demo environment, you can tell me, but I'm not sure you know how many log per minute you actually push to some logging vendor. So that's what we're trying to create, a very simple experience.
No, I mean, I might not know. I might not know the max nodes I needed this week, depending on load, but it would be an easy number to tell you.
But you know the average of, I usually
Yeah,
have about 3 nodes running in that cluster or whatever.
yeah. I like that pricing model. I like anything that's super simple that I can budget for with no surprises. That's what I like. I feel like you're there. That's not a surprise. I can budget for that. You have no idea. I can make it write a bug and have logs that went absolutely nuts for
It's
24
super easy
hours.
to go 30% higher in like next month's build just because of a mistake of a developer,
Yeah,
um, which is
yeah,
crazy.
for sure. And it's nonsense noise too. So you're paying for noise.
Exactly. Exactly.
I like the model. And I guess because you run on those nodes, you know how many nodes ran at any given moment. You know how many instances of your software is running.
Yeah, we eventually can report kind of anonymous telemetry on number of nodes running in the environment, so we can bill you at the end of the month. But other than that, all the data stays in your cluster, so we don't even take out.
Yeah, you're not charging for like storage. You're they're paying the storage they want. It's not a fee in your system per se.
No, it's not a fee.
I like that. So are you at a 1.0 on this product yet? Are you live or can people start using this?
Yeah, so I think we're much closer to the 2.0. I mean, groundcover has been live since kind of last October, completely GA. We've actually already released our second version of an eBPF sensor in last KubeCon, kind of benchmarked it against all the sensors, including OpenTelemetry and Datadog, and kind of shown how effective it is at high scale. We have a lot of big customers in production, where we have a fully available free tier, which people can try out. So you can try it out on a cluster, no matter the size. You can install us on a 100 node cluster. We don't care, just one cluster and up to 3 users, so you can try it out. Fully featured, no time limitation.
Do you have a Docker? Do you have a Docker image where I can run it in like kind or in a local Kubernetes environment?
So we support Minikube and kind clusters, and you can test it out on a local environment, just like any other environments. You just go into the SaaS experience we have in groundcover, and then you get kind of a command installation which includes a token for you. Just drop it out in your kubectl context, and you can install groundcover on any cluster. And we kind of encourage people to try it out through there. We have a very live Slack community where people get live support. We try to help as much as we can in like the different stages of onboarding and support, whatever people need. But that's usually the best way to kind of experience ground cover. Try it out on some interesting cluster you would like to test out, see the results, see the power of eBPF, see that it actually works out of the box, and then compare it to whatever you have right now. And
What's your stack? Is all the eBPF stuff written in C and the UIs are written in, I don't know, some node based tech?
so the actual eBPF bit is written in C. There's kind of the eBPF program being loaded to the kernel, and then there's actually the stuff doing all the data aggregation running in each node. That's written in Golang, and yeah, I mean the UI is React, so that's the stack.
React, cool. And how big is your team? Is everybody local in Tel Aviv or do you have a remote
So
team?
right now, yeah, most of the team is in Israel. The entire R&D and product team is in Israel. It's going to stay that at least for the near future. We're about 30 people already, so it's not that small anymore.
No,
Uh, yeah,
that's amazing. All right, we are out of time. I could talk to you for another hour just about the business, which I'd like to do, but time's up. Um, Amazing conversation, man. Shahar, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and talking about this.
thanks, Bill. It was very fun.
And now that you are an owner and founder of a company, um, I guess you're leading a smaller team now, right? You're not. Are you leading engineers now, or are you leading business people now?
Uh, yeah, so Yechezkel is leading, our CTO is leading all the engineering. I'm trying to be focused more on business right now. Yeah,
Yeah, you got to be the CEO, man. You gotta be out there. It's a completely different role.
it's a
That's
completely different
amazing. Okay. If anybody wanted to reach out and ask you a question or talk to you after listening to the show, and we'll put it in the show notes. But just what's the best way for somebody to reach out?
So you can go into groundcover.com. We have in our contact page, you can reach me directly. You can also join our Slack community, which is you have a link there on our website, and you can find me and DM me or ask a question in the general Slack channels. That would be kind of the best ways to reach out.
Brilliant. All right. This is Shahar and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast and hope to see everybody again real soon.